Welcome to What the AI, where we decode the latest developments in AI for busy executives and leaders. I'm Jeff Keltner.
And I'm Annie Delgado.
Annie, there's so much news this week. I can't believe I kept updating my news rundown for this episode because every minute something new came out. It was kind of crazy.
I know, and not just with AI. I just generally had to mute my news feed at some point today because between the election and everything that's going on, I'm a little bit overloaded.
Yeah, we're recording this before the election, but I think it's going to drop after the election. So no spoilers, please. We don't know yet what's going to happen, but certainly a lot going on any front you want to talk about.
I mean, it's good. I'm curious to see if we're going to know the outcome of the election by the time this actually hits next week. We might not know still.
We might not know. We'll have to wait and find out.
We'll wait and find out. I am personally excited for all of the political texts to stop. I think that there should be an AI model developed for politicians to be able to ascertain whether their text is likely resonating with its target audience. Quantity of text.
You've gone from helping to hurting. There's a point, and it's not that far in.
It is not that far in. Although I got major street cred with my kids because they look at my phone and they're like, all these famous people are texting you. So I'm like, yeah, your mom's important. What can I say?
Hold on to that while it lasts. They're going to figure it out pretty soon.
Exactly.
Well, let's get into the rundown of the news I talked about from this week. I'll give the quick hits of the headlines. Perplexity, launched their knowledge search in spaces. This was interesting. Allows you to add internal databases, so you can have the Perplexity style LLM search across not only public data sources, but private data sources. The details of what data sources you could integrate and how weren't clear, but I think a fascinating development in terms of bringing LLM type search into private data and collaborative environments where you could share context and documents with the team. OpenAI released a factuality. I don't know if that's a real word. I didn't look it up, but I'm not familiar with the word factuality.
It is now. Factuality.
It is now. A benchmark tool they called Simple QA, which has a set of prompts and correct answers. So you can assess, typically we've assessed LLMs by can they pass the GMAT or the LSAT or the MCE or the GRE or whatever human test. And this was more like a test designed specifically to see if LLMs are giving true or false answers. So that was interesting. ChatGPT, not one to be left out of the news mix, launched search the web in ChatGPT for paid users. One of my favorites, search your chat history. So now when I had a great chat with ChatGPT, I can find it again because they just didn't have that before. And they've now launched advanced voice mode on the web and Mac, not just on the phone. So that was a pretty cool launch. And then we'll move on. Anthropic released a bunch of stuff this week, an analysis tool in Claude that can run JavaScript and analyze data files, do visualizations, or answer questions about data files. This is actually one of my favorite features of LLMs. ChatGPT has done this for a little while, where you can upload an Excel file and just graph me this, graph me that, tell me about this correlation. So now available in Anthropic's Claude as well. And Claude with maybe one of the craziest launches where it can actually use a desktop computer, like control a mouse, move around, click on things based on a prompt from you. It kind of seems to take screenshots and moves around. It clicks things. I think some others working on things like this. So that was a fascinating, maybe a little scary, a little creepy announcement. And then we had the general availability of Salesforce's AgentForce. So, Salesforce famously, no software. Now famously, and I decided to rebrand everything. Everything is AgentForce, not just force.com. And they're really getting into what they think is the agentic future and how businesses are going to take advantage of that. And Mark Benioff coming out with some of the classic, like throwing a lot of shade at Microsoft, calling Copilot the new Clippy. And I don't think you can do anything that's more insulting to a Microsoftie than to tell them their product is the new Clippy. So he's out there throwing some punches into space, which makes it a kind of fun time to watch.
Before we take our deep dives, a quick word from our sponsor. This podcast is brought to you by Upstart, the leading AI lending marketplace that connects millions of consumers to banks and credit unions that leverage Upstart's AI technology to deliver superior credit products. Their platform includes personal loans, automated retail and refinance loans, home equity lines of credit, and small dollar relief loans. For more information, head over to www.upstart.com. Yeah, I mean, Jeff, there's so many different things we can dig into just from your news update there. So much interesting stuff going on, but I got to start with all of this news about agents. If we can kind of dig in there first, assistance was the previous word we were using, and ChatGPT was
Yeah.
your assistant. What does it mean to actually have an agent as opposed to an assistant? What does that look like? Like, what are you seeing out there?
I have a feeling this word agent or agentic, which seems to be the popular way to describe models that behave like agents, again, just making up words for us left and right. I have a feeling it's going to be a bit like AI, where the definition keeps shifting and nobody's really clear which is an agent, which isn't an agent. But certainly Microsoft has described Copilot this way. This new detail from Claude has been described this way. And I think roughly how I think about it is allowing a model to take actions on behalf of the user that a user typically would have taken for themselves. So as opposed to having a chat with a chatbot, it can actually go out and do something. The ultimate vision people have of this, something like, you can look up what's the best flight for my vacation to New York. An agent could go through the website and book it for you, right? And actually take that action on your behalf. So I think that's roughly what people mean when they say agent. It's a really interesting question if the agent will be acting on your behalf as a user, or in Salesforce's world, in many cases, acting as an employee interacting with the user. So whether that agent is like mine as Jeff and a user interacting with an airline, or whether it will be the airline's agent that's going to act as maybe a call center agent on behalf of the airline interacting with me, or maybe both and they talk to each other. I don't know. But that sense that it's a program taking actions on behalf of the user instead of telling the user what to do and having them do it, I think is core to what the agentic idea is.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating topic to think about. I mean, not just for business leaders, but just as a human, right? What actions do you want an agent doing on your behalf? And when you think about all of the things that we might be willing to outsource to other people to do for us, do you trust a computer to do that more for you or less? And over time, how is that going to change as technology improves? And what types of stuff do we actually want a computer doing on our behalf versus, another human doing on our behalf? When you think about, your financial advisor or people like that you might delegate important stuff to, your attorney, et cetera. What if you had an agent instead? What does that look like? How have you thought about this personally, like in your life? What would you want an agent doing for you versus not?
I don't know. I'm terrified of agents doing anything for me. No, I think there's a lot of stuff that makes sense. A lot of I always think of it as the administrative stuff. Sometimes I think of it like the trained monkey. Like when I'm doing a job that I feel like a trained monkey could do, is not a lot of thought, but there's a lot of just need to know how to do the thing over and over. I'd love to have agents that could do some of those things. But I do think it's a really fascinating question. Do you have an answer? Are you looking for an agent, Annie, to take certain things off your task, parenting tasks, life
definitely
tasks?
not the parenting tasks, because I'd like to not outsource that one. But a lot of the just, administrivia of your life, it would be great to just you mentioned planning a vacation in the 10 years ago, you plan a vacation, you go and you get your Rick Steves books and you read them and you take all of these notes and then something goes awry and you don't like how that went on your trip and you got to replan everything. The idea of having an agent that can plan a trip for you, or that can even go so far as compare prices, book the tickets, figure out where is the best place to stay. I love that idea. And get a little bit nervous on things that are more like a longer term decision, right? Like an agent, executing a financial transaction for me or something like that. What would that look like? Although even with that, I think there's some cool opportunity to think about, right? Like if you look at a typical online banking type of flow, there's so much fine print for a consumer to read. There's terms and conditions, and there's, privacy policies and all these things. And I'd be willing to guess, as somebody who spends a lot of their life writing these things, that not a lot of people spend a lot of their life reading it, unfortunately.
Guilty.
But yeah, I know, right? But you don't even need to, because you have me, and I'm like, Jeff, this is what you got to worry about. I'm your agent. But imagine if the average consumer had an agent that was helping them go through the flow and say, hey, this is the stuff you got to worry about. If you don't like this part of the, privacy sharing practices of this mobile app, this is the action you have to take. I think that's really cool. I think also a lot of regulators would be terrified by it, because what is the agent deciding to tell you versus not tell you?
Yeah.
But it might carry the opportunity for some pretty important consumer empowerment if we can really get this technology right.
It reminds me a lot of one of these, I think, what will be a recurring theme, which is regulators or others assessing the appropriateness of a certain use of AI based on an idealistic world based versus the real world. It's like you may not like how the LLM or the AI agent assessed a privacy policy, what it chose to highlight or not, but the alternative isn't someone who read it next to their lawyer and got a detailed point by point of everything. It's really me scroll. How far do I have to scroll before the approve button comes live and I can click it? Like people don't read that stuff. And so I think it's maybe one of those examples where we're going to let the perfect be the enemy of the good or the better, at least the better than today, which I think is a recurring theme in this world of AI.
Yeah, actually, I love that you brought that up. I think about that a lot where people are worried about the risks, but not really recognizing, okay, that actually the opportunity here is way better than the status quo we have today. And it's just getting started. Like today's world is not risk-free. There's a lot of risk in a consumer trying to, understand those agreements. Think about when I'm sure you have a mortgage on your house, like most of us do, and you sit and you get a huge stack of papers and you're trying to read them and parse through all this information while you're making a huge financial decision. Wouldn't it be great to have some sort of tool that could help you parse through that? And to your point, most of us aren't bringing our attorney alongside us to help with that.
Even if you're ambitious when you're signing the mortgage docs, you read the first page, the second page, by page 120, you're just like, where's the signature line? Where do I have to initial to move on to the next one? Like my brain can't process that much. So that's the reality of the world.
It's so true. It's so true. And I think it's going to be interesting. I mean, obviously, I'm really interested in the regulatory and policy space around, around the whole financial services industry, but especially around the use of AI. And a lot of the laws that we have to comply with today were written before the internet. Like, how are we going to think about applying them in the era of a computer agent? So interesting to think about. I think it's going to get pretty fun in the next couple of years. So
it's going to be fascinating. And also, it's funny you talk about the world that was built without the internet. The fascinating thing to me is that some of these agents are solving what's really a very hard problem because they're trying to use the world as built for humans. And if we wanted to build the world for agents, we could actually do it a lot more easily in many ways. We could build a world that could speak computer and they could transfer data with APIs and make it simple. But what they're trying to do, I remember there was did you see the little device? I've got it right here, the little Rabbit R1. Did you see this? A hot thing at CES last year? And they had a large action model. And the idea, it's like a little almost cell phony thing. Looks like, there you go. A little screen and whatever. But their big thing was they had a large action model, which would actually use apps. So it integrates with Uber to order but it doesn't have an integration to Uber. It just opens up Uber in a web browser in their server. And then they taught it how to click the whatever buttons to go to the right places to order a car for you. So as opposed to integrating with Uber, they just used Uber as a user would, and they trained a model to do that, which is way harder than just integrating with Uber through an API. So I'll be really curious how that agentic model plays out in terms of, are we really going to screenshot a user screen and move a mouse and click on a button the way a user would? Or are we ultimately going to find that we really integrate these things where the models can have better access to the data and capabilities they need without trying to pretend like they're a human to move a mouse cursor around a screen, which feels pretty slow for a computer program to interact with the world.
Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting. I think you see the same parallel with self-driving cars. Most people that I talk to about self-driving cars are like, I'm not afraid of being in the self-driving car. I'm afraid of having a self-driving car out there trying to interact with a bunch of humans who are unpredictable. So I want to go in the self-driving car at the moment that everybody else is also in the self-driving car, because that'll be the safest future. But right now we're at this middle ground where the self-driving cars are trying to predict very unpredictable human behavior and people making mistakes. And to your point, an infrastructure that was built for humans that make mistakes and all of these types of stuff, and not just built for, a more autonomous thing. So it's pretty interesting.
Fascinating. I also wanted to maybe transition us into this, maybe a broader topic, but, I saw the announcement of the factuality, I made fun of that word, model, simple QA from OpenAI. But this, we talk about responsible use and the world being built for things. How do you think about the OpenAI putting out there a factuality metric, and just generally the concept of how worried we should be about the accuracy of answers we get from various AI models and how that changes the way maybe we interact with them?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I feel like in a lot of ways it's the question, right? And this is, so many people are afraid about AI hallucinations and, getting false information from their AI tool. And again, going back to that sort of status quo bias we talked about a few minutes ago, how much false information do you get when you talk to your neighbors or your family or all of the people around you? Because the line between fact and opinion can be so blurred. And so I actually really love that they're even attempting to try to put some metrics around that, and how factual does something have to be for it to be considered, safe for use versus not, and how do you sort of tell the difference between a fact and an opinion? I think there's some things that are pretty obvious because they're black and white and there's only one answer, but really quickly when you interact with these tools or interact in a conversation, you're going beyond black and white into shades of gray pretty quickly. And so how do you think about that is it's kind of a fascinating thing. And I'm pretty impressed that they're even making an attempt to do that and then talking about it publicly so that people can sort of get insight into how they're thinking about it. I mean, I don't know. Do you feel like you get 100% factuality when you're talking to friends and neighbors?
I don't feel like I give 100% factuality, so I assume I'm not getting it either. I'm kind of famous in my family for BSing, but being right like 70% of the time when I'm making stuff up, because I just, much like an LLM, kind of remember it from somewhere. And it turns out my memory is not precise, but often accurate. But then sometimes they're just like, you just totally made that up. I'm like,
well, it was funny when you were talking about the news rundown and how ChatGPT can remember the histories of previous conversations. I'm like, I wish I had that plugin for my brain, because sometimes I'm like, we were talking about something and it was related to this other thing and I know it was important, but I can't retrieve it right now. So retrieval mechanism is amazing.
Yeah. So I was also impressed that they came out with a new way to assess accuracy that wasn't so much of the metrics we've had for how smart a model is, so to speak, is really been based on some version of giving it a human's test. Whether it's the LSAT or the GMAT for business school or the GRE exam, you see them kind of put out these, it passed the medical continuing examination, the MCE, whatever it stands for. So it's as smart as a doctor. And I went, I mean, yes and no, because it's learn how to answer certain tests, but it's very different than like actually having correct information. So it's interesting to see a test designed for an AI and designed around more factual based information versus kind of test type testing with testing maybe logic and other things as well. So I thought it was a fascinating shift in how they're thinking about it.
Yeah. And also, I mean, I think the other thing that's pretty cool about this information that they put out is this concept of AI testing AI. Like the basic framework is they have a model that's fact checked by another model, which is fact checked by another model. And then a set of humans that sort of oversee which one was right. And if this one thought this one was wrong, what is the right answer? So that sort of framework of having AI challenge AI is a pretty interesting concept to think about. At first, it sort of bends your brain a little bit, right? If we're trying to oversee AI, instead putting an AI oversight mechanism in place sounds scary at first, but it's actually pretty cool when you think about it, because the compute time is so much faster than a human sort of fact checking line by line. And so anyway, I like that framework a lot. And I like that they still have that human oversight at the end of, okay, what are we seeing and how do we keep sort of pushing the needle here?
It's a really fascinating point. I think for any leaders out there thinking about oversight of a model, as you may think of AI overseeing a model or another AI as two levels of risk. Like I copied the copy, like it can't be good, right? Like multiplicity style is going to get worse. But also the other reality of that is like, I can now run like 50 tests. I can have 3 different models, 5 different models testing, not 10% of the things I want to know if they're right, but 100% of the things, because all of a sudden my ability to actually run things through a QA process or a test process is much, much, much higher because I'm using an automated computer model to do it. And I can play them off. So it does change a little bit. Like you have to have a little faith in that secondary model, but you also can use it in a much more robust way than you ever could doing. I mean, think about how many more answers they can check using a test like this than you could ever check handing a list of questions and answers to a human going, hey, can you go tell me if ChatGPT got these things right or not? Like, how did it do? Like, that's just almost impossible. So the scale of how you can approach it really changes when you take that approach.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So I want to going back to the conversation about agents, some of the fundamental shift we're seeing in a bunch of these new tools coming out, not just the AgentForce tool from Salesforce, but others as well, is sort of fundamentally going to be a business model shift for a lot of heavy hitters. What do you see there?
I think it's a fascinating question. So maybe we'll tackle. There's two big ones that you see. Maybe we'll tackle AgentForce first because it's a little more straightforward. I think really fascinating. So if you listen to the way Salesforce is positioning AgentForce, which just to take a step back, is the idea of being able to build autonomous agents within a company based on the data in Salesforce. And maybe the prototypical example would be being able to replace a call center agent with an automated AI agent that could answer a phone call, have an interaction with the customer, take care of resetting a password, making an appointment, changing an appointment, things like that. The fascinating thing, at first glance for Salesforce, this is very dangerous because they charge per seat. And if you're saying, hey, you need fewer seats to do this thing, maybe that's not good for them. And they actually are introducing a new business model for this, which is charging per transaction, which is fascinating. Where, if somebody calls in and the agent handles it, they'll charge you for that call, which is really nicely is the way we used to think of SaaS pricing, charging for value. So I think that business model is really fascinating. The other thing, I think the point Mark Benioff would make, if you it gets, I think, to the core of this question, like, are we going to be replacing users with these AI agents, or are people going to be using them? That sounds like, reducing workforce. And I think Mark would just say, there are very few industries where we really have too many people. I mean, his example would be healthcare. We're like, your problem with your doctor's office isn't that there's too many people waiting to take care of you. It's that when you call in, you're put on hold forever. When you show up, people are busy. And so if we can not necessarily replace people, but start to have the availability of more staff, that I don't have to pay a full-time hire to be able to be more responsive or do a 1 day, 3 day after follow-up call for a visit as a doctor, but I can have an agent do that. And I'm only charged for the calls they make. So if they make 10 calls, I don't have somebody sitting there all day being idle. I just get charged for 10. I think it's a really interesting shift in the business model and a really interesting perspective on, are we replacing people, or are we really allowing more jobs to be done than we could reasonably do by hiring and training full-time people in some of these industries? It'll be fascinating to see if that really plays out for them or not. But that's an interesting shift, I thought, in the way they're thinking about it.
Yeah. And I really like how they are embracing the innovator dilemma, right? You think about Kodak at whatever point in the past. I think the first sort of pitch of a digital camera came from a Kodak employee, and Kodak was like, well, no thanks. This threatens our bread and butter, which is selling film, right? And we all know how that ended, right? But so I love, this Salesforce, embracing, hey, we can still create value here, and we just have to have a little shift here where instead of charging per seat, we can charge per transaction for the value that we're creating. And I think that's super interesting. And I also love that you touched on, and I totally agree, there's so much fear about AI taking jobs, but actually AI will just make us better at our jobs. And there's no shortage of problems left in the world to solve. And right now we're bogged down from solving them because we're doing all of this stupid minutia all the time. And imagine if we didn't have to do that and instead could tackle hard problems. That'd be a pretty amazing future to be moving towards. So it's interesting.
I'm a big believer in that as well. And I think one of my examples of that people always that really resonated with me was, and when we created spreadsheets, there were whole buildings of people whose job was to do calculations in spreadsheets. I mean, they literally, a person at a desk was like a cell doing a mathematical formula, sum or whatever. That was their gig. And it's not that we don't have accountants anymore doing math. I mean, last I checked, there's still plenty of accountants in the world.
Right.
But the number of firms that had access to real robust record keeping and accounting went through the roof, because small businesses that couldn't afford an accountant could now, do that work with a spreadsheet, with a piece of software. And I think the same will be true here when you think about, well, we're going to replace call centers. Maybe people who are, the CEO is picking up the phone, or the product manager is picking up the phone because there's nobody else to do it because we just don't have enough staff. We'll be able to actually provide higher levels of service, and we'll be able to start having, more companies be able to offer more services more seamlessly, because they'll be able to access a pool of virtual work that's much more manageable and approachable than hiring full-time employees when you may not need them in that actual physical work. So I think there's a lot of upside here from an employment point of view, not just downside.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, I think we could probably do a whole episode on this, and maybe we will at some point, but a whole conversation around the ability, AI, like kind of being able to foster competition for some of these small businesses or small and medium sized businesses that right now can't really compete with their huge company counterparts. But if they have access to some of these tools that they can bring some of these things in house, how much more we're going to see those businesses flourish in the next couple of years and decades is going to be pretty cool to see. So
now, I'd be remiss if we were talking about business models and we didn't talk about search, given that is maybe the prototypical innovator's dilemma for Google and ChatGPT, the biggest brand name, just put out a web search capability for paid users, coming to other users soon, where you can get up-to-date answers by web search. So I think it's really fascinating. Right now, ChatGPT, OpenAI makes all their money from subscriptions. They're not making money in advertising, which is obviously Google's kind of totally inverted in their search business. They make you don't pay $20 a month for Google search premium edition. You just, get Google search and you pay through your attention with advertising. And Google obviously has released some search generative results. Their kind of answer to this or their version of this, it still has all the links below. And I think it's unknown because the amount of revenue ChatGPT is making is large, but is it durable? And is it anywhere near equivalent to what Google makes today? And can Google make that transition? Or is there a viable business model for OpenAI? I mean, they're making a lot of money on premium subscriptions, but they're spending more training their models right now than they are making on those subscriptions. And whether they have enough differentiation to keep charging people $20 a month to use the tool, I think it's an open question if they're actually creating a new business model behind the one that they are kind of eating up with Google. And the other part to me is people worry about Google search, but like a very small portion of Google searches drive all the money, right? And if you replace questions like how far is the Earth from the sun on Google kind of goes, okay, like you can take that one, ChatGPT, because nobody was buying ads against that query anyway. In fact, against most queries. And so you can take a lot of share of search in terms of turn search from Google without really hitting their bottom line. And it'll be interesting to see if the business model for ChatGPT is durable and if they actually start eating into the level of searches and the types of searches that are monetizable for Google, because it's not clear yet that they will. So, but that'll be obviously one of the biggest business models and companies in technology, and their core product now being attacked pretty directly by OpenAI. It'll be fascinating to see if those two different business models, who wins out in the end. I'm not going to make a prediction. I've been in this game too long to start making predictions about that.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard to make a prediction, but it is sort of interesting. I remember like sitting at a family dinner at some point in the past. Because I'm not ChatGPT, I can't recall exactly when it was, but having a debate with my brother-in-law about whether people would actually pay. Like Google must serve you ads because nobody would actually pay for this. ChatGPT sort of debunked that. Like lots of people are paying for this ability, which is sort of fascinating to see. But can they compete with the business model of a behemoth like Google, who makes so much ad revenue? I don't know. We'll see what happens.
I think that there's two big questions. That one is, do they have to? If their cost base ultimately is lower once they've trained enough models, they don't have to replace Google's revenue to be a profitable business and take away Google's profit, right? If you say people paying it less money now for the same capabilities or less revenue is made. The other problem for that I think is unknown and maybe seeing your sweet spot of regulatory issues is, Google, the deal with Google and publishers was that Google would index your content and then send people to your website where you as a publisher could make money. And that was the business model for so much of the content on the internet upon which these LLMs are trained and from which they're drawing. When you do ChatGPT search and it summarizes the answer, NASA doesn't really care when you search how far is the Earth from the sun, that it looks up NASA's website and summarizes the answer. But the New York Times cares when you go, what does the latest polling say about the election? Like, it cares that you're giving an answer without sending money or eyeballs over the New York Times for them to make money. And so I think the other question for the LLM version of this in the business model is, will they be able to continually access the kinds of information and sites they need without being able to share revenue or send traffic, which results in revenue to those providers? Because ultimately, like, that's the information is not being generated by the LLM. It's learning it from somewhere. And the sources of those information are looking to have part in the economics. And without the part, like, they may cease to exist. So that's, I think, the other challenge to their business models. Can they sustain the ecosystem that's necessary to continue providing great answers with a business model where you just pay OpenAI $10 as opposed to having a business of advertising that shares that revenue with partners. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because obviously, like all these companies to stay in business, like for the New York Times to stay in business, it has to make money. But there's also so much of a, uh, consumer demand or human demand that information be free, right? And the ability for a ChatGPT or an LLM generally to sort of democratize the spread of information in a way that the printing press did in the 16th century, right? All of a sudden, information can be spread and ideas can be spread, and that's a pretty amazing unlock. And you wouldn't want the thing that holds you back from that to be, a $7.99 newspaper subscription either. So how do we solve that problem is an interesting thing to see how it happens.
I'm sure we'll have some news from regulators and lawsuits. Some of these companies have now sued Perplexity for using their data without their consent. Some of these companies like OpenAI are licensing content from certain of the providers and paying money out to the news providers. So it'll be fascinating to see how this all plays out. And I'm sure we'll have news in future weeks to discuss. I'm going to bring us now to what we hope to be a regular part of this podcast, which we're calling the hands-on segment, to just give you some information on how we specifically use these tools. And I thought for the first one, I would go through how I used large language models to actually help us design the podcast before we launched it, because it ended up being a great thought partner, which was fascinating. So I used, as I tend to do, I'll just give you my history. I tend to like take my same query and throw it into like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, and maybe Perplexity, depending what it was. And then just look at all the different results and see what worked for me. And I have found for creative endeavors, for writing or kind of, summarize wherever, I found Claude to be my favorite. So I use Claude for this. And I started off just asking it like, we debated before we came up with what the AI, we went through a lot of different names. You may remember some we voted, and this was kind of a last minute dark horse that kind of came in and everyone, oh, this is kind of fun and clever and creative. We'll go with it. And did not come from Claude, although Claude was a big fan of it. But I then started feeding context of the name of the podcast, who our audience was, the type of topics, and asking questions. And that context is one of my pieces of advice is the more information you can give an LLM when you're doing it, when you're asking it a question, the better a kind of answer it will give you. And so I had one long chat that I started asking about names, and here's the audience, and I like this one because of this, but I'm not so sure about that one. It's too technical or it doesn't. And that history, because of the way the LLMs work, all go into its future answers. So it got smarter and smarter. And maybe the two craziest moments that I'll give you from this for me were one, after maybe a week and a half, it came time to write the description that goes in iTunes and our website, whatever. I said, can you just write me a description of this podcast we've been talking about? Give it no other information, no more descriptions, just like we've been chatting about it. You know what I'm talking about. Give me a short description to go on iTunes. And it spit out a fantastic description. And I was kind of blown away because mostly you see this. And then I put it on our website. Well, it's too long. Can you shorten it up? And I like the shorter one better. And it came up and just shortened it down 40%. And I was impressed that I didn't have to give it a lot of prompting for that. It really had learned from the history of our conversations that kind of keeping an ongoing chat, one of my recommendations. And then the other thing that blew me away when I was using it is I took the news rundown that we went through at the top of this episode, had, thanks to all the news last week and the week before, had more items in it. And I said, hey, I've got like 15 items here. I really need to have like 5 to 7. Like, what do you think? Which ones should I cut? And which ones should I keep? And it gave me a really thoughtful answer. With one exception, it had exactly the same stuff to keep and cut that I had in my mind. I already had thought about what I wanted to do, but there it was. And it gave me good answers and it gave me good rationales. This one's very technical. It was like a GitHub announcement. It's like, you probably don't need to talk about this for a business audience. It's very detailed. And so I was really impressed with its ability to give me thoughts. And again, to your question about agents, I would not have said, hey, you write my script for me. I'm just going to read it. But as a thought partner, someone to bounce ideas off and say, hey, I've got an idea, but like, am I crazy? What do you think? It was really impressive how it came up with stuff. So that was my hands-on as using LLMs. Again, I use all three, but Claude was my favorite for this. And I will probably continue to have my What the AI Claude project open and ask it questions every week about news items or how to summarize things or how to talk about stuff, because it's been a really helpful thought partner.
I love that. And I mean, we all need a thought partner, but having one that's available 24/7 and can kind of mimic your vibe and copy your vibe, such a cool use case. You send me the rundown on Slack. What do you think? And I was like, looks perfect to me, but I didn't know you didn't write it. So now you just tattled on yourself.
No, sorry. I was just surprised, just so blown away that it had the the thoughtfulness, the creativity. It's not like a simple question. Like here, I
Yeah.
just published in a bunch of bullet points. I was not even sure if it would understand the bullet points, the talking points underneath each or whatever. And it just like understood it, digested it, and then had, like I said, really thoughtful responses. So to me, that's been a helpful tool for this. If you have tools that you'd like us to talk about or learn more about, let us know. I think that's going to be it for this week. So Annie, until next week, thanks for the time. This was a lot of fun.
Great to see you, Jeff. See you next week.
This podcast is brought to you by Upstart. If you'd like to take a deeper dive into the fundamentals of AI, check out the AI Certification for Financial Services course Upstart released at aicertification.upstart.com. Again, that's aicertification.upstart.com. If you like this episode, please leave us a rating or review. It's the best way to help others find us. And finally, if you have topics you'd like to see covered or questions you'd like to have answered, drop us a line at email@whattheai.fm. That's it. We'll see you guys next time.